Hey everyone, welcome back to The Great Retention with Kamber Parker Bowden, sponsored by Generational Performance Solutions. I'm Kamber, founder and CEO of GPS, where we bring you strategies to cultivate a high-performing and committed team in a rapidly changing workplace. Whether you're looking to enhance cross-generational communication or navigate generational dynamics in the office, you've come to the right place. Today, I am thrilled to have Jessica Dawson join us, founder and CEO of Dawson Consulting, executive coach and mentor, coming to us from New Jersey. Maybe you can share a little bit more about where you're located today during our conversation. While we are new friends, I was inspired after our last conversation where we discussed her career in consulting, coaching, and building communities, something that matters a lot to us here at GPS. Jessica's impact on business owners throughout her career is significant, spanning from leadership development, coaching, mentorship, workshops, and more. I knew she would be a great guest on the show to walk us through some aspects of her work that can help business leaders like you utilize innovative techniques and data, as she likes to say, architect a legacy of resilient, meaningful success. From her 9 years at Gallup and her experience in neurology's connection to performance, I have no doubt she will share some crucial insights today to help our listeners grow. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Wow. Thank you so much for having me, Kamber. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. And I would be remiss not to mention that Kim Kiefer, a dear friend of mine, connected us. And so shout out to Kim if you're watching and listening. So let's get started with a lightning round. So in a couple of sentences or less, answer the following questions. What is something that is not on your resume?
Oh, I love this question. So I am an avid yogi. Specifically hot yoga. And I started this practice back in 2012, back when I was a stockbroker and tensions were high. So it definitely allowed me to build that mental callus necessary to stay grounded in the midst of everything that was happening in 2008. And it has been my rock ever since.
Did we talk about that in our last meeting?
I don't think so.
Because I am obsessed with hot yoga and I'm a teacher. So I feel like we got to talk more about that at some point.
We definitely do. Absolutely.
I knew I liked you, but I like you even more now. If you were not in the coaching speaking business, what would you be doing?
Ooh, this is such a good question. You know, the interesting thing about me is that I had tried so many different things. I was a stockbroker. I was a cardio kickboxing instructor. I ran political campaigns. And when I finally landed on coaching and teaching, I knew it was my calling. I would say what it has evolved into is me also being in the business of belonging. So I'm cheating in terms of answering the question because I actually feel like I'm right where I need to be after all of the experimenting that I did earlier in my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a career. That's so cool. And if we had more time, I'd love to dissect some of that career trajectory, but it's lightning round, so we can't. What is the best professional advice you've received from a mentor?
This is so good. Trust yourself and follow your instincts. And The Matrix is one of my favorite movies. And there's this quote in there around there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. So meaning education, credentialing, degrees, all of those things are important. However, there is nothing like going within to find the answers and trusting what you receive when you do so.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. And then last but not least on our lightning round game is the best business book recommendation you've ever received. What is it?
Oof. Okay. So this book is called A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger, and it is about the power of inquiry. And I'm not just saying this because I am a coach. When you think about change, when you think about innovation, when you think about problem solving, it always starts with a question. And in this age of information where everything is at our fingertips, information becomes more of a commodity. And what will always keep us on the leading edge is your ability to architect really great questions. So for me, it's a more beautiful question.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about that today, so we'll come back to it. Now, I did a moment ago say that we didn't have enough time to talk about your career trajectory, but For those who might not know you and your background, give us just a little bit more so that people understand who we're speaking to today. And, you mentioned you started out as a stockbroker, and then, you've done exercise, teaching, you've done, now you're a mentor and you run a coaching community. So just give us a little bit more background before I start diving into some of our questions today.
Absolutely. So I grew up in New Jersey, super close to Manhattan. And some of you may remember the take your daughter to work days. And my dad was an investment banker. So I remember going into New York City with him as a little girl and being magnetized by the glitz and glamour of New York City and saying to myself, well, I want to live in New York City and become this high-powered finance professional. So I did that, quickly realized that I actually didn't like it, but I still stayed for like 8 years. In 2008, I was working at Lehman as a stockbroker, and it was really my wake-up call. And so it was actually through that I saw talent being squandered. I saw the arrogance of leadership, and I just thought to myself, there has to be a better way. So I ended up going back to school, landed a job at Gallup, and that's really where I fell into the work of learning and development consulting. So I was on the road about 80% of the time. I could be resourced anywhere in the world. And I did things like with Clifton Strengths, equipping strengths coaches around the globe and getting them certified, keynote speaking, employee engagement work, and working with executives to really understand the predictive analytics of what was happening from an engagement perspective and how that was driving the business. And so, it really allowed for me to get my sea legs in the industry. And I really did grow up at Gallup professionally. And all of the time that I spent on the road, it allowed me to, again, go within, trust my instinct, find my confidence. And when I came out of Gallup, it was 2023. So today I still run a practice where I'll still go into organizations and do the same type of work that I did at Gallup. And then I also run a BIPOC coach community. So, yeah. So, and I lived in New York, I've lived in Chicago, now back in New Jersey. So it's been a really wild ride.
How do you put so many years of experience into such an eloquent, concise way? That's really hard to do. And so thank you for, being mindful of time here, because there's so much that I want to get into, but I think you really painted a beautiful picture of your career trajectory and how you got here. So thank you for doing that. Let's now talk about the multi-generational workforce, because that is, our bread and butter here. It's experiencing a lot of change right now. So micro-generations are emerging, technology is expanding, and leadership is changing as we know it. Help us set the stage by talking about these massive changes from your experience working with your clients. What are you hearing and seeing about the multi-generational workforce right now?
Oof. It's such a big question, right? And I consider us to be in this workplace renaissance. Post-pandemic, the aftermath is still here. And, when I think about even the conversation around multi-generational workplaces, it's not a new topic. I actually vividly remember facilitating a millennial workshop maybe 10, 12 years ago now, when millennials were like really getting into the workplace. And I'm a millennial, or what I like to call a zennial, because I'm kind of the Oregon Trail generation and they didn't know what to do with us. Mm-hmm. And I remember leading those workshops and there being baby boomers in there, Gen X in there, millennials in there. And the conversation was so interesting because the baby boomers were saying, like, this is nothing new. Like, we want the same things as millennials. And then the Gen Xers saying, like, we were talked about when we entered into the workforce as well. So I think although there is generational landscape that we experience within the generation, at the same time, there is this thread that weaves us together as human beings. But in this workplace renaissance that we're in, the change is exasperating the challenge with the dynamics within the multi-generational workplace. So you've got hybrid work, you've got remote work, and then you've got the return to office mandates. These dynamics, they didn't exist for previous generations. So that is the one new thing I would say. And then what younger generations are really experiencing, and what I hear in my coaching is like, they're entering into the workforce during this aftermath of the pandemic. never really developing their sea legs in a traditional office setting. So the common struggles that I hear are things around, I feel isolated, I'm remote or I'm hybrid, I lack mentorship, there's an influence gap. I'm unsure about how to really build relationships with decision makers, invisibility. Like, how do I get considered for projects and promotions when I'm not even in the room, right? And then on the leadership front, or for those that are more established in their career and navigating this, it's interesting because what I hear is I'm having to do more with less. So I have fewer resources, thinner teams after layoffs, right? More responsibility, less support. So there's this generational friction that also emerges because the leaders will say things like, I don't understand this new generation. They don't respond to recognition or feedback in the same way. And the old playbook doesn't really work, but the new one is still being written because we're all in this change and experiencing it.
Love that.
So so it's an interesting time.
It is. And a few things that you mentioned that I really liked are, there is this thread that weaves us together. I loved hearing, what the baby boomer said about the millennials. It's like, we want all the same things. And that's a message that I share often is there are differences, but let's look at them as strengths rather than these challenges, because when you recognize that all generations have their own strengths, you can leverage them to really work better and more efficiently in the workplace. But it's important to acknowledge that there are some of these nuances. So we all want the same things. We just have different paths and ways of getting there. And so that'll be a common theme that we can talk about more today. But during our first conversation, Jessica, one of the things I just absolutely loved was your passion for community and the importance of community. So can you talk about why this matters so much in today's workplace and how community is showing up across generations, industries, and work environments? So you already mentioned hybrid, remote, return to office, but just tell us a little bit more about community.
Yes, such a brilliant question. The topic and the notion of community, I go back to this quote. I worked for Gallup for a long time, so I've got a lot of quotes from Gallup. But the difference between a good life and a great life is community. What's interesting for us as human beings is that we are wired for connection. It's not an optional thing. It's actually essential. So community is multifaceted. So when you really think about it, we live in physical community, but then there's also these micro communities in online spaces, social media. When I think about the workplace, there are teams, then there's ERGs, there's coaching cohorts even that I've led where it's like executives coming together and just this notion of feeling belonging, like I can let my guard down, I can take my mask off, I can talk to people who get it, right? And the problem that a lot of workplaces are experiencing that I hear is that there is hollow connectivity. So we're hyper-connected technologically, right? But often feel disconnected. I do think that social media gives us a false sense of belonging with likes and followers and all of these things. And then even within workplaces, you have things like Teams or Slack where it can feel like you're connected, but then it can still feel hollow, right? So in the workplace, this can show up as like being on Zoom all day, but I feel isolated. The screen is not 3-dimensional, it's 2-dimensional. Or having access to people, but no real relationships in the workplace, feeling like a cog, not a person. So we've lost the third place, which historically has always been a factor. So whether it's religious organizations, sororities, fraternities, bowling leagues, villages and tribes, we always lived in a community. And so I think that there's this longing for that. And again, the pandemic exacerbated that because we all went into our houses, we isolated, right? But now this need for connection is bigger now than ever before. And when I think about just from a generational perspective, the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, when they think about work, a lot of times it's like work is where I work and home is where I live. And there's almost like this separation versus millennials and Gen Z, the boundaries are blurred. Yes. And they expect more from their workplaces because they don't necessarily have that third place like other people had. And then the other thing, just from a generational perspective, millennials and Gen Zers, they get married later or not at all, and they have fewer children or not having any children at all. And so their workplace becomes that much more important to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
What an important point. I'm so happy you mentioned that. Thank you. That's a mic drop moment and it's so early in our episodes, but if people, they're going to take a lot away from this episode, but if they take nothing away but this one thing, it is that millennials and Gen Zs have really blurred the line between home and professional, and that's why they have these expectations that really are quite drastically different from Gen X and baby boomers. And so just so well said. Thank you. And I do want to share a little bit more about your BIPOC community that you've created. I think it's over 270 coaches, correct, in this community?
Yes, for sure. So we're a little over 270 coaches, and mostly in the US. We do have some international coaches as well. And what's interesting is that the idea for me for this community, it actually came in meditation. So I know it's bigger than me. And when I started it was I told my actual co-founder, I told her about it, and she said, I want to help you build it. And we just started by meeting monthly. We didn't know what it was going to turn into. Mm-hmm. And what we quickly realized is that people had this need for belonging. And when you are attracted to being a coach, you typically tend to be a nurturer. And so we wanted to create a nurturing space for the nurturer. So it's really a container where our three pillars are connect, develop, and impact. So from a connectivity standpoint, you can connect with people, again, that get it, where you can let your guard down, where you can vent about that really tough coaching client or vent about not landing the business, right? But then we also develop, so we have things like scholarships towards ICF certification or people to come in and talk about how to build a business, right? Or just getting back to coaching fundamentals. And then the impact shows up with people pulling in each other on coaching work or even making friends, which sometimes is tough to make as an adult. So it has blossomed into this really beautiful space.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And, congratulations. I am excited to continue to learn more about that. And let's talk about the scientific aspect now of your coaching and mentoring. I think you kind of briefly alluded to this with your pillars, but part of your approach relates to neurology's connection to work performance. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and about what you find most compelling about the connection, and share any advice for leaders who are listening and watching this episode, looking to create teams with more productivity and less stress, better overall performance? What can you speak to on that?
Love this question. At the heart of the work that I do, it centers around talent. And when we really think about what talent is, everybody has it. And it's really your neurological advantages, right? So the things that you do naturally without necessarily thinking about them, the way that you naturally think, feel, and behave encompasses your talent. And when you activate that or even use your talent with intention, what happens is you're able to accomplish things with greater ease, excellence, enjoyment, and energy. The instrument that I use to get a baseline measurement of talent is Clifton Strengths, right? So it's a relational shortcut. Some people know it as Clifton Strengths Finder or Strengths Finder, but it's now called Clifton Strengths. And it's a psychometric analysis, which allows me to understand at a baseline, how is the person that I coach, what is their lens? How do they see the world? What is the language that they speak? But even if you don't have that as a leader, questions can be your best way to understand how someone can be better productive. And so it might sound like, what's a win that you had this week, right? Why was that win important to you? Why does it matter? Or when you're giving feedback, that presentation was really great. I feel like you could have done this and this better. What was your take on it? Or, you just landed a really fantastic account. If you were to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 meaning like you knocked everything out of the park, how would you rate yourself? So open-ended questions, what it allows for is for you as a leader, as a manager, to collect data points of people so that you can start to understand their patterns and also take notes on what people say, because over time, the pattern will reveal itself. And then you can set people up with work accordingly. So using a tool like Clifton Strengths or a Myers-Briggs or a DISC is great. But even if you don't have that, lean into inquiry. The book that I mentioned, A More Beautiful Question, it's also a blog. And then the other tip that I will often tell leaders is to go on the ICF website. They usually have slews of coaching questions that you can bring into how you lead. And that can be really helpful as well.
Great. Thank you. That's I have a lot of reading to do after today, it seems, but exciting reading. And it's just getting curious, right? And asking really, really good, specific questions. But I love hearing about the scientific aspect of the work that you do. You've mentioned Gallup a lot, so let's talk a little bit about Gallup. You certainly know the value of data-backed leadership decisions. And so Gallup recently reported that U.S. employee engagement has continued to decline from its 2020 peak, and that younger workers are experiencing the biggest drops in engagement. In your experience, why is that decline happening, and what should leaders do about it? Now, I'll pause here because you did talk a moment ago about millennials and Gen Z. But I also want to mention, I feel like every time I get an email from Gallup, the employee engagement numbers are declining, if I'm being honest. Like, I just feel like since 2020, it just continues to go down. So would love to know your thoughts on employee engagement as a whole. And if you feel like you already covered that a little bit with your comment about the boundaries that Gen Z and millennials don't seem to have because of them not having that third space, then we can keep moving on.
Yeah, I really love this question. I mean, the reality is that engagement has been stuck for decades, and it often will peak and have these peaks and troughs. It's never actually gotten to where it needs to be. And it's an interesting science because it's not static, right? So that's why every time you get a Gallup email, it's talking about engagement and it's moving. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So there is this unwritten social contract that each and every employee has when they enter into a workplace that says, if you give me what I need, I will in turn give you what you need, right? And so when you think about engagement, it really is the nexus between the attitudes that people are bringing into work with them each and every day and the performance outcomes that they are ultimately responsible for. And so if my needs are not being met, my productivity is going to drop. Right. So if we take that back to millennials and Gen Z, they're facing these unprecedented times. And so I do think that it's the landscape of the workplace that's contributing to that. But if I go back to your earlier point about the questions and the conversations, we need to be having, as leaders, more conversations to understand the workplace needs, because that's not necessarily a generational thing. That a lot of times will be an individual to individual thing.
Yes.
And if you're not having the dialogue to understand, have I actually set expectations implicitly and explicitly and so on and so forth, it can be really challenging to meet the needs of the engagement for the worker.
100%. I feel like I've been saying that for years, and it takes, I think, until it really matters to leaders, they're not necessarily going to pick up on that. So it's very important to have those conversations. In one of our most recent reports, because I think you know this, that GPS, we put out reports each year, sometimes a few times per year. The 2026 Workforce Trends Playbook that we recently published, one of our major findings was that cross-generational collaboration is actually on the rise. So that is something I think that surprises people. But people really want to collaborate and connect with other generations, but oftentimes leadership at companies is unintentionally blocking that collaboration with things like what you just said. They're not willing to have the conversations about the needs of the entire workforce. A lot of leaders we work with or a lot of leaders we should work with, but they don't always come to us. And so that's an important disclaimer, is they're ones who come to us and they say, we really, it's the way it's always been done. So that's how we're going to do it. That's what we're going to keep doing. And so what I have found is leadership really is unintentionally blocking this collaboration. So where are you seeing this happen with leaders, and what can they do to be catalyst for collaboration rather than inhibitors?
It's such an important discovery. And it's interesting too, just thinking about this from a multi-generational perspective, because typically when you're at the top of the house or you are in those executive seats, you're there because you have been there longer. So you tend to be more seasoned just in terms of how long you've been on the planet. And so just thinking about unblocking that with intention, it's good for business, because when you think about the Gen Z folks or even the younger millennials, they typically are in the more junior positions and they tend to be closer to the front lines.
Yes.
So if you're stuck in strategy as a leader and just thinking about the direction of the company, a lot of times you have blind spots that those younger generations, right, because they're closer to the front lines, can actually showcase for you. So I think it's things like task force or special projects can be really helpful. I used to talk a lot with organizations that work cross-functionally, where if there is a rub, maybe it's somebody more junior sitting in on the meetings of that other cross-functional team and vice versa. That creates transparency. That creates different ways of communicating, different data points, hearing things differently. So I think it's, I don't think that it's always done intentionally, for sure. It's a strategy though, when you can bring the generations together with intention. And I think that there's a variety of different ways to do that. And the other thing is, if you're unsure of what to do, ask. Because what also drives up engagement is when you seek opinions of others. And even if you can't implement everything that the millennials or the Gen Z folks are telling you to do, you can welcome their ideas, and just the ask alone will boost engagement.
Right. Yeah. Inquire.
So it's about, yeah, right. Right.
Love it.
Inquire.
Really great perspective. So one question is a little bit of a curveball question, which I always love to do just based on the conversation. So you mentioned young professionals really kind of sitting in these younger kind of entry-level roles, right? And something that we've been toying around with a lot, and I actually have a keynote this year that I started called How AI is Rewriting the First 5 Years of Work, because it is, right? It is changing how these entry-level roles operate. And so what are your thoughts on how, the next generation is literally entering a world where there are fewer entry-level jobs because AI is replacing some of them. So talk to me as if you're talking to one of your coaches, right? Like, how do your coaches coach your clients through this kind of work, or coach their clients through this work? And what can you tell us about it just from your years of experience in multiple industries working across multiple generations?
Oh, such a great question. The reality is AI is here. It's not going anywhere. You're absolutely right about all of that. And we've seen this before, maybe not to the degree, but think about the telephone operators that got laid off, right? Or when people had to switch from factories into more of the 9 to 5 and in the office. We are reinventive as human beings. So for me, it always goes back to the question, this has the ability to challenge our thinking and for us to get out of the conditioning that we've been taught to go to school and get a good job. There's a professor, I forget his name, but he said by like 2030, 2035, 65% of people will be entrepreneurs or business owners. And so what I actually think, what I think is going to happen is the rise of community. And I actually have this vision of, and then I'll talk about coaching, but I have this vision of communities like mine that are coaching communities that expanding. So maybe it's a community of engineers, or maybe it's a community of marketers, right? And they become really, really wicked, like subject matter experts because of they're in community, and then they resource each other out, and that's how they get work. So almost taking control back from a people perspective. Right. But when I think about coaching through this, it's getting smart and it's getting scrappy and it's thinking outside of the box. And everybody's going to do that in their own way. But for the people who are, one of my other favorite business books is Who Moved My Cheese, The cheese is not going to be there for much longer. So it's time for us to think differently, to ask bigger questions about what we can do to change and to move with the fluidity of how the landscape is changing and not holding on to the past.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that we still need to invent. Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot that we still have to invent, and not holding on to the past are 2 points that I really want to take away from that last answer. So mindful of time, what else do you think our audience and leaders that are listening and watching need to know about you and your work, and how can they be better prepared for attracting, developing, and retaining top talent in the year 2026 and beyond?
Ooh, love it. I think it is understanding your culture and bringing in community into your workplace. Many organizations are already doing this on a product side, but how are you creating community inside of your workplace? It's very important in terms of retaining top talent. And again, we know that it's a competitive advantage when you do. One of my favorite books is The Business of Belonging. And they talk a lot about the history of this and how it looks in workplaces. So definitely check that book out. And in terms of me and my work, I do use AI in my work. I also am very much a proponent of human connection. So I probably will always offer coaching or even group coaching or facilitation that's human to human. And I will use AI as much as I can, but there's nothing like the human connection. Community is also AI proof. So when you formulate and forge communities inside of your organizations, it's something that will not be diminished because of the build of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom today, Jessica. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out, I'd love to connect. JessicaCDawson.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation if anything strikes your fancy.
Wonderful. And we'll make sure we put ways of how to contact you and your business in the show notes for today. But once again, thank you so much for joining us on The Great Retention.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for our listeners and watchers today for joining us on The Great Retention. Before you go, remember this: the generational landscape is shifting, and today's workforce is not the same workforce we once knew. Our mission is to help you save time and money by identifying these shifts and demystifying generational differences through our workshops, keynotes, our leadership programs, and workforce planning. Contact us today if you're interested in transforming your multi-generational team, and let's drive your business towards long-term sustainability and success. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others know where to find episodes about this topic. And don't forget to share with your coworkers. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.